I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime. What do you know about the circulatory system?
that blood circulates the body, depositing oxygen so that your tissues don't die.
That's excellent. It can also move things out of your body.
Yeah.
The circulatory system is responsible for pumping nutrients throughout your body. It ensures that glucose makes it to your brain. It's pivotal, like most of our body systems.
You sound like you know a lot about the circulatory system.
Someone else who knew a lot about the circulatory system and human vasculature was Annie Lay, a researcher who worked in pharmacology and specifically focused on the human circulatory system. So to tell you about Annie Lay and her story, I need to set the scene for you. Ivy League campuses. Synonymous with academic excellence, a sense of untouchable security. But within the hallowed halls of Yale University, a chilling crime would turn that illusion on its head. In September 2009, Annie Lay, a 24-year-old doctoral student on the cusp of her wedding, vanished from a seemingly impenetrable research building. What followed was a frantic search, a chilling discovery, and a case that still raises disturbing questions about vulnerability, obsession, and the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. Annie Lay was not your stereotypical vision of a college student. Annie Lay wasn't a party girl. She didn't go to school to socialize or drink. Her entire raising led to her being an incredibly responsible young woman. She was the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants who really drove home the importance of education. And she knew that her education would allow her to have the kind of life that she wanted to and provide her with the kind of stability and accomplishments that she was looking towards.
You said that she was a doctoral student, though.
Yes.
I don't expect very many doctoral students, not when you're in grad school, to be...
Well, even beyond that, like even as an undergraduate student.
Okay.
Like Annie Lay has a history of, not that any person is perfect, but the way that her friends have described her, that her family has described her, is that she was always incredibly responsible. Everything has always been about her academic work and her success.
Okay.
So even despite only being a student or a doctoral student, we're talking about someone who had completed research that actively changed her field of study in pharmacology.
What do you mean?
Like research that she had completed had been published and changed the understanding of treatment for diabetic people and their vascular systems.
That's
their
incredible.
Circulatory. I know. It's crazy. And so, you know, kind of on the flip side of the, I don't expect a doctoral student to have been crazy or wild. We know that this kind of success of creating and publishing research that changes our understanding of something like diabetic circulatory issues is someone who's clearly been working very hard towards that goal for a long time.
Yeah. How old was she?
Annie Lay was only 23, 22.
Wow.
Excuse me. Every age but the right one, 24.
Got it.
So not only was Annie Lay an accomplished doctoral researcher with her own research happenings, she was also engaged to be married.
Yeah, you said that she was on the cusp of her wedding.
Yeah. And
how close is the cusp?
In the instance that we're talking about, Annie Lay is only 5 days out from her wedding.
Okay.
Okay. In addition to being studious, Annie Lay's friends and family describe her as being someone who was warm and full of infectious laughter and the kind of person who could light up a room. She was a tiny young woman, standing in at less than 5 feet tall, 4'11", roughly 100 pounds. And she still had a kind of fierceness and energy about her that led people to enjoy her company. Annie Lay was also known for being incredibly meticulous. In all of this time leading up to her wedding, which at this point in time was only 5 days away, Annie had been working on finalizing one of her research theses while also planning her wedding. Can you imagine?
No. I'm already sitting here trying to imagine, and that sounds so hectic.
Yeah.
So busy.
And she did it with like grace and poise and ease.
It would never be me.
I don't do anything with grace or ease, much less things that are really high pressure. And doing multiple things, worrying about multiple big events, you can forget it.
And yet, you do have a habit of making things more complicated than they need to be, or more difficult than they need to be.
That's also not intentional. I never mean to complicate things, but
No, but you said that you don't do things with ease.
No,
and
never.
I think sometimes that's by your own doing. Not intentionally, but sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles.
Yeah. I also sometimes don't stop and think about things long enough to figure out the easiest way to do them.
Oh, yeah. You definitely want to just like forge onward sometimes. And I'm like,
yeah,
can we chill for just a second and think this through? But by the time you do that, a lot of times you've lost interest.
Oh, 100%. But Annie Lay's not like that. Annie Lay is...
Not everybody can be like
smart and decisive. And she had found what she thought of as her ultimate partner in her fiancé, Jonathan. Jonathan was also an incredibly well-educated person. He was a doctoral student at Columbia University studying physics and mathematics.
Had he made any advancements in these fields the way Annie had?
Not to my knowledge, but he wasn't necessarily the subject of my research in terms of... I didn't feel a real impetus to share any of his accomplishments beyond bagging Annie Lay.
So he's suspicious.
Not particularly.
He's suspicious to me because you said that you didn't feel like including information about his accomplishments.
Well, again, I didn't think about what I was doing or saying, and I just don't care much about him in the grand scheme of things. But he can be suspicious.
That makes him suspicious.
I love him being suspicious. That's good. He is suspicious. He's the man in this relationship. He is suspicious. Excellent observation. Now, although Jonathan was her fiancé and she thought the world of him,
he didn't think the world of her?
Not enough.
Whoa.
Why wasn't he there? Why wasn't he at Yale with her?
Well, because he was at Columbia. I mean, they have different academic paths, but it does seem like they're both very academically driven.
It seems like...
How did they meet?
What a good question. I don't have an answer for it.
In my mind, they met at the same undergrad school.
Some really sweet, serendipitous, kind of nerdy academic meeting where they were discussing the application of physics in restructuring the vascular systems of diabetic patients.
That is one theory.
That's what makes the most sense to me.
Okay.
They were just workshopping some research ideas, and it was just a cute happenstance meeting.
What did you say he studied?
Physics and mathematics, which I feel like physics is just applied mathematics, but I don't actually know. Again, so although Annie Lay thought the world of her partner, Jonathan, her soon-to-be husband, really most of her time revolved around her research, which meant that the majority of her time was spent in the Amistad building on Yale's campus. The Amistad building, for the most part, was a very nondescript, almost business park-looking building, but it was home to the research of several different high-budget, high-dollar pharmacological experimentation. It was packed with state-of-the-art equipment, boasting a key card entry system, as well as over 70 security cameras. It's a place where most people would feel some level of safety and comfort. Despite the level of security at the Amistad building on Yale University's campus, on Tuesday, September 8th, 2009, Annie swiped her key card to enter Amistad.
So there was a building on their school campus where you felt safe? Weird.
Odd.
Yeah.
Hard to believe. You know, one of the features of Amistad is that because it had so much research material in it and it was so sensitive, potentially billions of dollars worth of research, it was kept very secure.
Okay, sure. Human life is priceless, though.
That's true. It's a place where I would feel more secure than most.
Okay.
Honestly, I would probably still feel secure there, but we haven't gotten to why someone might not, so. On Tuesday, September 8th, 2009, Annie swiped her key card to enter Amistad around 10 a.m., pretty much her typical daily schedule. Later that night, Annie did not return home. Now, her roommate was concerned at first, but not overly concerned. It wasn't until communication occurred between Annie Lay's roommate and her fiance that there started to be a level of worry.
Off the top of your head, how far are Columbia and Yale from each other?
Well, one is in New Haven, right? New Haven, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And then Columbia is in New York City.
So...
Not that close. Not that far.
Okay.
I don't know. I think everything up there is right next to each other.
So do I. So I've got no concept of...
Yeah, I assume you could get there by train.
I mean, I feel like you can get anywhere in the New England area by train.
Yeah.
But is it a short train ride or a long train ride?
That's a good question.
All right.
I don't know. Okay. Massachusetts is next to states. And I don't know why I'm saying Massachusetts because we're talking about Connecticut.
Massachusetts is near Connecticut.
Which is near other places in New England.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This seems productive.
Okay.
Let's go.
So Annie did have a phone date with her fiance later that night, around 8 p.m. She was supposed to talk to Jonathan via the phone. However, she never called. Josh didn't.
Or Jonathan.
Jonathan didn't think much of it. Sometimes Annie could get wrapped up in her research or other things and not call. Usually they just caught back up with each other when they needed to. I'm
not trying to be critical of Annie, but I feel like if somebody's... I mean, and everybody is allowed space to be human. Mm-hmm. But when he's not that concerned because this could happen because she could get so wrapped up that she could miss a planned thing. You said earlier that one of the things people said about her was how responsible she was.
Yeah.
So that doesn't... Those two don't jive for me.
Right.
Or they don't gel as somebody who could get so wrapped up in what they're doing that they miss appointments regularly enough that it wouldn't cause concern for their fiance, but they're responsible. But I guess you mentioned earlier that they were engaged to be married in 5 days, but it was like he was her partner and her research was her baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And for her, you know, I think when we talk about responsibility, we can be responsible in different ways.
Or we can have like fixed responsibility.
Right.
Where, yeah. Yeah.
And so I think that...
I feel like there are areas that I'm really responsible in. Mm-hmm. And then, but I don't think that people would call me a responsible person. I don't think that's one of the words that people would throw out, you know.
I'd call you responsible.
You think that that's like a defining characteristic of me?
I wouldn't say it's a defining characteristic.
But that's what they were saying about her, is it's a defining characteristic of who she is.
And I think that's true for her. Part of why he probably wasn't concerned is because she is so responsible. There's very little to worry about when it comes to Annie Lay, you know?
Okay. That makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I think so too. And they do become appropriately concerned when she never shows back up at home that night.
Okay, but the date was set for 8. So what time do they become concerned?
I'm not exactly sure. I just know that it's that evening, the evening of September 8th.
Okay.
So, anyways, Annie's roommate starts to raise the alarm. Okay. And she notifies authorities. She notifies Jonathan. And in those very early hours of the investigation, theories swirled. Some postulated that Annie had taken on the role of a runaway bride, fueled by the kind of impending nature of her soon-to-be wedding. But Annie's credit cards, her phone, her purse, all of those things were still in her office at Amistad. So her research facility, she left her purse there, her phone, her credit cards. There were no charges. So there was no way that Annie had run away and gone somewhere.
Why would that even be a conclusion that they would jump to? Had she had any misgivings about her?
No, but I don't think she had any like known misgivings about Jonathan or about their wedding. I think that most of the time when authorities hear that a grown person has gone missing, they work under the assumption first of why would they have just left? Where would they have gone? What would be occurring? I think that they have to try to remove those more plausible explanations for someone's disappearance or missing status than to immediately hop to, oh my God, this person was abducted, or this person was murdered, or something terrible happened to this person.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. That's how they should.
Right. But I think that's how they do approach it.
Yeah, they're like, adults are allowed to go missing. Okay.
And they are. That's true.
Right, but more often than not, people aren't choosing to vanish from their lives and leave all of their belongings and relationships behind.
It would be kind of cool, though.
Okay, who hasn't thought about doing it?
Just running away, leaving everything behind, not thinking about it. You can return. I would love to return like nothing happened.
I think they call that a vacation.
That's not enough for me. Like, I want to be gone, leave in the middle of the night, leave no trace. I kind of want people to be worried. Like, I don't want it to be easy for them that I'm disappeared, but I would like for everything to be fine when I get back. I want everyone to be super chill about it. I want to be like, hee, I just had a good time.
You want people to be chill after they've been concerned and then find out that you didn't have the decency. I, for one, would not be chill. I'd be mad at you.
Okay, but I'd want you to be chill.
I know that that's what you would want. This is a weird, perfect world scenario for you, but that's not how I would.
I would like to know that you were worried, but I wouldn't like you to be upset when I get back and you find out there wasn't a reason to be worried.
All right, flip it. I've disappeared. You can't find me. And then
I'm getting on KSAT 12.
Hopefully concerned.
I'm calling the news.
And but then I stroll back like 6 days later, 6 weeks later.
Work, bitch. 6 weeks is crazy. 6 weeks is crazy. 6 days is fine.
How long were you gone when we were supposed to be chill that you just...
Oh, like 3 or 4 days.
That is just a vacation. You're talking about going on a vacation.
It's not a vacation.
It's a secret
because
vacation.
Nobody knows.
Secret vacation.
No one is going with me.
Secret solo vacation.
I don't have my phones. I'm using cash. I'm in the wind.
All right. I don't actually have the time or the energy right now to delve into the psychological reasons that you are wanting this to be a thing for you.
I think I want to just know that I could do it. Like I could disappear without a trace.
What would be the sign for you that I disappeared without a trace and that it was my own doing?
That somehow your dogs were taken care of. You couldn't leave your little creatures uncared for, unattended. You would never disappear without some kind of plan for them.
Yeah. What if you didn't know?
Know what?
The plan. What if there was a plan? What if they weren't here either?
Oh, then I'd be like, they're fine.
But what if they weren't with me?
How would I know they weren't with you?
You wouldn't.
Okay. So
I would put you down as the emergency contact at the kennel that I dropped them off at. And then after I didn't come pick them up, they would call me and I wouldn't answer. So then they would call you.
Oh, okay. I would be worried. That's when I would start to be worried.
Okay.
That would be like a concern for me.
Yeah, that I didn't pick them up when I was supposed to.
Right. Like if it gets
because
to
I'm
me,
responsible.
You are about your dogs 100%.
Yeah.
So if they were left uncared for, I would be like, "Oh shit, something is wrong with her. She didn't just get up and leave." Also, you're not I can operate in selfishness and be okay. I don't know if you have the ability to really do that for whatever reasons they may be. I don't think you like to rely on other people to take care of the things that you need taken care of. And so I don't think you would necessarily, like, even if you did run away to get away for a few days and something like that happened, I don't think you could stand it. So the police initially, Occam's razor, they think the most explainable and reasonable theory is that Annie Lay has a run. Cold feet.
That is not Occam's razor when her purse and her money was left behind.
Exactly. That's correct. That's when they're like, oh, wow, she probably didn't run away. So that does click for them once they discover that her credit cards are unused, that everything is still in her purse, and that it's still in her office. Now, the Amistad building, which was once this beacon of research and progress and safety, is now a potential crime scene. Investigators quickly work. And when I say investigators, there were more than 40 investigators working this case between Yale PD, New Haven PD, State Police, and the FBI.
Okay, you said quickly.
Quickly.
How long did they go from runaway bride to...
A day.
24 hours.
Like less than a day.
23 hours.
As soon as they discovered that purse and there was no credit card transactions, there was nothing that was like missing, they quickly were like, oh, this is not a runaway bride. I mean, how far can you get without your ID and money and credit cards?
Well, stay tuned because you're going to report back.
And a phone. These more than 40 investigators, not all of them are poring over the security footage, but they make quick work of examining the footage from these 70 security cameras that can be found at Amistad. And they come up with this chilling discovery that Annie Lay enters the building at 10 a.m., but she never is seen leaving the building. There are cameras at every ingress, egress, but Annie Lay never leaves the building.
And they discovered this using the video footage.
Yes.
Not a key card log.
Correct. They, at this point, have discovered nothing via key card.
Do you have to scan? You have to scan in, but do you have to scan?
Assuming that someone doesn't
exit?
hold the door for you.
Okay. Whoa.
People shouldn't hold the door for you. Okay.
Yeah, not on a school campus.
But they do, right?
They do.
So despite it being secure, or...
But do you have to scan out?
I think any time a door opens, it has to be because of a key card use.
Okay.
But I actually, now that I say that, I think later in my case, I talk about how you don't have to scan out of a room.
So that would make sense to me that they wouldn't use key card. They would maybe use key card to determine when she entered the building, but you wouldn't be able to use it to determine when she exited, if she exited.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
So at this point, police are quickly becoming more suspicious that some kind of foul play is afoot.
Are they suspicious of Jonathan?
Not yet.
Okay.
So at first, Yale police are really flustered. They can't understand where Annie Lay went in this building or what's happened. But then all of these investigators start to kind of come to the same conclusion. Annie Lay was not even 5 foot tall, weighing in at less than 100 pounds. They quickly start considering the idea that maybe Annie Lay had been removed from the building in some kind of trash receptacle, her body having been stuffed inside. When they made this kind of determination, this realization that that's what could have happened, they did an extensive search of the disposal containers, the waste containers, the disposal sites where the waste goes, and no kind of indication of Annie Lay's body was found. With no leads, the investigation really started to turn towards a couple of different people. The first of which is Jonathan, her fiancé.
Naturally.
But just as soon as they considered him as a suspect or a potential person of interest, they ruled him out. Jonathan's alibi was solid. What was his alibi? Would you like to ask?
Well, I'm going to assume that he was in New York.
Correct.
And she was in New Haven, and that they're not as close as you and I in central South Texas would assume.
Absolutely. There was no way he could have made it there, made it back, especially with all of the other things that he had doing and going. So he was ruled out, and now they had to start looking to people that Annie Lay shared space with. During this process, 5 days go by. We arrive to the day that Annie and Jonathan were to be married. On this day, a maintenance worker reports that there's something amiss. A strange odor is emanating from a basement bathroom in the Amistad building.
Is there any information on how the word about her disappearance or her missing status got out to people, or did people show up to attend a wedding that did not happen because the bride was nowhere to be found?
I don't know all of the specifics around how all of that played out, but I know that Annie's disappearance became like state and national news the day after police determined that she was missing. Like, it was a very fast turnaround. And so that got communicated to the masses almost instantly.
I mean, all of that to say that I'm pretty sure that the death of O.J. Simpson wasn't something that was quiet, but I didn't learn about it until almost 2 months after it had happened.
I mean, we're also talking about 2009. I think people were still getting a lot more of their news from watching television news.
Okay, that makes sense.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
Also, when we think about people who would be attending her wedding, I have to assume a lot of it would be family. Older family. They were definitely still watching 9, 10 o'clock news, 6 o'clock news.
Hopefully that's not how they were finding out.
No, I don't think so. So, again, a maintenance worker reports that there's a strange odor emanating from a basement bathroom. When he goes to investigate, he pulls back a metal wall panel in this basement bathroom. Well, he doesn't. Detectives do. They remove the metal wall panel after he reports the strange odor. And that is where they discover Annie Lay's battered body. Annie Lay's body had been stuffed behind this metal plate in the basement bathroom wall. It was very clear that whoever did this to Annie Lay was brutal. She had several wounds. She had a broken jaw, a fractured collarbone, and we know that these injuries weren't sustained during a passive attack. They were able to determine that she had fought back against her attacker. Another odd thing is that...
Well, were they done pre or post-mortem?
From my understanding, those fractures, the broken jaw, the collarbone, those happened prior to her death.
The reason that I ask is I imagine... I don't know about this metal panel insert place. I know that she was a very petite woman, but to make her body fit into a space, I imagine that there's some level of gross physical manipulation that would maybe have to be done to enforce to fit her there.
Yeah, to put her body in such a space. Well, and from what I understand, she was sexually assaulted post-mortem.
Post-mortem?
Yes.
Okay.
This discovery of Annie Lay's body was shocking. It shocked all of the inhabitants. I shouldn't say inhabitants, but the people who worked in the Amistad building. It shocked the Yale community and became a huge news story. Quite frightening for the people who worked in the Amistad building because, again, not a place we think of such a violent crime occurring, especially not with all of the security measures that they had in place. At this point in time, pressure really started to be placed on the police department and law enforcement because they had made no significant discoveries. The crime scene held a lot of potential clues. There was the odd placement of Annie's body. She still had surgical gloves on. And then there was also this seemingly out of place item, an almost fluorescent green pen.
A fluorescent green pen?
Yeah.
She was a researcher, right?
She was, but Annie Lay was not a green pen kind of girl.
Probably not fluorescent green at that.
Correct. In addition to finding Annie Lay's body with the surgical gloves still on her hands, they found this fluorescent green pen. At first, this fluorescent green pen didn't really make any kind of difference for what was going on. However, forensic evidence was found on Annie Lay's body. There were 2 distinct male DNA samples found.
2?
Yes. The DNA was run through CODIS, and there was a hit.
Okay, so somebody was already in the system?
Mm-hmm. This man's name was Kieran Robinson. Now, immediately, Kieran Robinson was a really attractive suspect to law enforcement. He was attractive, the wrong word.
Maybe.
He was an enticing suspect to law enforcement. He was kind of this already criminal who had drug trafficking citations, kind of minor stuff, but still looked good for the crime because he had a record.
Anything violent?
Not to my knowledge. As they continued to investigate Kieran Robinson as the potential perpetrator, they realized that he had also just been involved in a violent altercation at a bar. However, 2 things ended up discrediting Kieran Robinson as the perpetrator. 1, Kieran Robinson's DNA was found at the site on Annie Lay's body because he had been a contractor during the construction of the Amistad building. So his DNA, its placement in the area where Annie Lay was found, somehow making it onto her person, was simply kind of this freak accident of he had been a construction worker and his DNA had somehow ended up there.
How old was the Amistad building at this point in 2009?
The Amistad building had only been built less than 2 years before.
I'm asking because I imagine that the building was newish, but not new enough that his DNA would have been left in a open space that had been cleaned. Like, I don't think that she's picking up his DNA in the research lab or anything. My guess is that his DNA was probably sweat or something else that was in that panel behind that wall.
Right.
Where it's probably not opened or accessed very often or hadn't been cleaned thoroughly.
That's the supposition I would make.
Okay.
I would think that DNA had been spread or passed to her body through that area that was tucked behind the wall. Another reason police or law enforcement had to forego Kieran Robinson as a suspect is because he had actually died months before Annie Lay's disappearance and death.
In the violent bar incident? Oh my gosh.
He had actually been shot.
Holy shit.
So it was not Kieran Robinson.
It would be difficult to make a case against him. So who's the other?
No matches. Not found in CODIS. And with all of their leads kind of drying up, law enforcement turned to keycard logs. Had they given cursory glances to the keycard logs before? Sure. But now that all of their other leads, again, had gone dry, they started to more meticulously examine those keycard logs. After having revealed all of the security surveillance footage and looking through the different keycard logs, police learned that there had been someone other than Annie who was repeatedly accessing her research lab in the days prior to her disappearance.
So her lab was just for her?
Yes. Her lab was just for her research.
How big is this building?
It's sizable. It's pretty big. Like, to me, it looks like one of those...
How many people worked in this building? How many doctoral students had their own labs that were not accessible to other people?
They are accessible to other people, but not necessarily. Like, it has to be, I guess, whoever has access rights to those rooms. But for instance, Annie was in G13. So based on that nomenclature, There's probably an A through an E13 at least.
Do you think? I think G is like...
A through F?
Yeah, but I think G, to me, is ground. Or garage, but probably not garage.
So to answer your question, the Yale Amistad building was a 120,000 square foot building that housed 3 different programs. The first, the interdepartmental program in vascular biology and therapeutics, Annie Lay's specialty.
Right.
The human and translational immunology program, and the Yale Stem Cell Center. So even though I can't tell you the exact number of labs, I can tell you that it was a substantial building that housed a great deal of research. Not only had this unknown person or unnamed person accessed Annie's research lab in the last several days before her disappearance, they also happened to be the last person to swipe into Annie's lab before she vanished. These key card logs, these security records, started to help police paint a new picture. Shortly after Annie was last seen, there was a forced evacuation due to a fire alarm in the building. One of the things this helped police determine is that by this point in time, when the fire drill occurred or the fire evacuation occurred, Annie Lay was likely already dead.
How do they know that?
She did not exit the building. After discovering her body and having been placed behind that wall, while I can't completely understand how they came to this conclusion, they work under the assumption that Annie Lay was already dead by the time this fire evacuation occurs.
What's the timeline?
As in how?
As in what time the evacuation occurred, what time she got there, what time the last known sighting of her?
So the last time they have record of her swiping into anywhere, I think I mention it later. I can't remember right now off the top of my head. But I do know that the fire alarm was said to have gone off near 3 p.m. And I did write that shortly after Annie was last seen, there was a forced evacuation. Law enforcement starts to look more heavily and investigatively at G13, Annie's lab. Here, a student reported that they had seen blood on a box of wipes in Annie's lab. Now, blood in Annie's lab didn't make much sense, because despite her doing work on the circulatory system, Annie Lay did not handle blood. She was not handling live test subjects in that way. Her research would not have required the use of human blood. The police department did then put a guard posted at G13 24/7 to make sure there was no kind of interference. However, a gentleman named Raymond Clark, a 24-year-old animal care technician for this research laboratory, began to visit G13 with frequency. He always approached in a very nonchalant manner. He would often try to engage with the on-guard or on-duty police officer through small talk, but he often rubbed people kind of the wrong way, as if he was disingenuous.
So he was coming by her lab, chatting up the officers that were standing watch there.
After it had been deemed a potential crime scene. And not only did Raymond Clark go by and visit, it's reported that at one point in time, Raymond Clark also attempted to shift materials around.
So he went into her lab.
Yes.
Wasn't it a crime scene? Why was he allowed to gain access?
He would just stroll on by and visit with the police officer.
Okay, so Annie Lay didn't deal with human blood.
No.
Did her research involve animals in any capacity? Was she using animals to do research for diabetic?
Assumably to a degree, because Raymond Clark did have access to her lab.
But then wouldn't there be blood? If there's an animal and she's doing research on diabetes and what did you say specifically that she made an advancement in?
Improving vascular circulation for diabetic patients.
So how do you determine that without blood?
I don't know. There shouldn't have been blood there.
Okay.
But I know that Raymond Clark was able to access her lab through his key card.
Interesting. Assumably, there had to be an animal involved.
Potentially. Clark also happened to be the same person who had accessed Annie Lay's laboratory several times via key card in the days prior to her murder. Coworkers described Clark as being a loner, someone who kept to himself, but in other instances, they described him as being an uncomfortable oversharer, sometimes making inappropriate comments.
Okay, he did primarily work with animals, though.
Yes.
So I don't think that's... I think sometimes people who don't do well with other people do tend to work with animals or with dead people or in physics and mathematics.
Anyone who's super smart at science, I think, has to be a little odd. But to be fair, Raymond Clark wasn't there as a doctoral researcher.
No, he wasn't a researcher. He
was a hired animal care technician, what most people would consider a low-skill level job.
Which is kind of what I'm saying, is he was simply hired as somebody who helped care for the animals. Mm-hmm. So to me, it is not surprising to find out that he was not somebody that made people feel warm and fuzzy inside. That he didn't necessarily have great interpersonal relationship skills.
Yeah. One of the more frustrating elements of the research that I found is that when all of this was happening, there was a refusal to shut down the entirety of Amistad because there were millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of research actively ongoing in the Amistad building. And so you have this presented as, oh, this research is life-changing. We can't put it on pause. We can't shut down the Amistad building. But in the same breath, it's also mentioned that private equity companies have millions and millions of dollars of R&D in this facility that they're working on. And so it almost feels like Annie Leigh's investigation is put second behind pharmaceutical company profits.
That is not surprising.
No, and it is just as equally disgusting as it is unsurprising.
Yes, but the way that the pharmacological industry kind of runs this whole country is inherently disgusting. So
absolutely. As police started to turn their attention towards Raymond Clark, it also became known that Clark had an ex-girlfriend who had filed a domestic violence report against him. This, paired with the key card trail and the semi-suspicious behavior, began to make Clark a more suspicious person of interest.
I mean, the odd behavior in and of itself.
Well, and another thing I forgot to discuss is that during this episode with the fire alarm, it was predicated by this malfunctioning vent hood. So there was no actual fire, but whatever it was tripped the fire alarm system, and the entire building was forced to evacuate. Now, I already shared that Annie Leigh was not seen leaving.
Was Clark?
Clark was seen leaving.
Okay.
However, he evacuated towards the end, after most of the people had already evacuated the building.
One of the last people out.
Yes. And not only that, Raymond Clark looked visibly shaken, upset almost. You could tell he was not having a normal reaction to the inconvenience of a fire alarm. And so...
Well, I imagine that it's not a public high school type situation. I doubt that they do regular fire drills. The only place in my life that's been a thing has been at a school. And I know that this is a school, but it is a research lab first and foremost.
I don't want to pretend like I know laws outside. Well, first off, I don't want to pretend like I know laws.
Right.
And I don't want to pretend like I understand laws around fire safety in Texas and especially not in Connecticut. But for instance, I know at my current workplace, we have to have an emergency preparedness plan for any of those events, and we have to practice them quarterly. There is an instance where everyone has to evacuate the building as if there were a fire.
Interesting.
Yeah. And when I was a student in Arkansas as an undergraduate, we had to do random fire drills.
At your college?
Yes. Yes.
Wild. I've never...
And I'm trying to remember if there was a difference between doing it in the dorms versus doing it just on campus in general. But I know we did it every 2 or 3 months in the dorm, because when I was actually living in the dorm, I had to participate. But then also when I was an RA, we would get to take turns pulling the fire alarm. And so it would also sometimes be a master operation where every single dorm on campus would have their fire alarm at the same time.
This is blowing my mind because I lived in a dorm for 12 months. I lived in the same dorm year round. Moved in the end of May and didn't move out until May the following year. Not once ever in that 12 months do I recall us having a fire drill. And not only that, but at UT, I don't recall ever having a fire drill. It's possible that I had them. It's not necessarily like I would have registered them.
Right.
I don't recall any of the fire drills that I did when I was a student. Mm-hmm. But I know that they happened.
Right. And, also now that I'm thinking about it, if we're talking about a building that had millions and millions and millions of dollars of research, it would make sense that they would have some kind of emergency preparedness plan that they had to be ready for.
Yeah, but because it was more of an academic building and not a residential building,
right,
it was likely not a requirement that they do drills.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is that while fire drills are supposed to be for the safety of humans and people, in my mind,
you think Big Pharma is making sure that there's something to take care of?
Yeah, what assurances
research
do we have that our research will be as maintained and saved as possible? And if they're paying for the funding, if they're funding the building or they're funding research that the university is doing, I could see why they would have an impetus to practice. However, I don't know.
I guess what I'm saying is if this is not something that happens frequently, if it's not something that can be seen as an inconvenience, but maybe as something like if you cared for the animals in a building and the animals weren't evacuated, but there was something going off, you might be concerned for the lives of the animals that were in the building and he was the only one that was acting
he's
distressed.
The only one who had this grimace, kind of upset look. And not only that, instead of going out where the rest of the evacuees had gone, he walked further down the sidewalk and kind of adopted this weird pose of squatting, but sitting on these steps. And authorities think he looks distressed because he places his head and his hands in this footage. And you can see him kind of having this tension in his body, this frustration. And so this kind of tips them off that something had occurred right before him evacuating the building because he seemed very pressed, upset, not typical behavior.
Okay.
So now the police have a new prime suspect, Raymond Clark.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did people have to scan back in after the fire incident or the
That is a really good question. I don't know if they made them go through the process of individually scanning each person in or if it was kind of like they do
at a school where somebody opens the door and holds it so that the populace can re-enter the building
in a timely fashion. I don't know. Raymond Clark was very cooperative with authorities. He answered their questions. He never tried to make himself unavailable.
No, he was extra available. He was showing up at the crime scene, becoming all chummy with them.
Absolutely. 100%. And they began to use this material they had gathered from the key card logs about Clark's movements around Annie's lab. And they also used the information they had gathered about him using a nearby storage closet, G22. And they began to more meticulously look over this storage closet that had kind of previously been under-evaluated or under-examined.
And it's a storage closet, but it required scanning?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. And so this storage closet at G22, detectives re-examine it. And in this instance, someone has this kind of brilliant idea of maybe I should get down on the floor and take a closer look. And they end up discovering this singular brown bead.
Bead?
Bead. Yeah, like a piece of jewelry bead. By looking at it and reviewing the footage of Annie Lay's entrance that day, they're able to determine that it is a bead from Annie Lay's necklace. Despite having missed it the first time, they now know, okay, this is Annie Lay's necklace bead. But there's no record of her coming to G22. As a matter of fact, there's no record of Annie Lay ever entering that room. As they continue to search, they notice that in the ceiling tiles of G22, that one of them is not flush with the rest.
Okay.
And above the ceiling, they find a blood-soaked sock.
blood-soaked?
Yes.
What was her manner of death?
Strangulation.
Or I guess that's not her manner. That's her cause of death.
Okay.
I meant what was her cause of death. Okay, was there blood? I mean, I know that she had broken
Well, and she also
bones.
fought.
Blood-soaked to me elicits this idea that there was some sort of stabbing or that it was more than like blood flecked or...
Well, and remember, there's also that blood that they found on the box of tissues in her research lab. And so I don't necessarily know of any stabbing, but for some reason there is blood.
So she likely was fatally harmed in her lab, G14?
G13.
G13. And then there was evidence of her potentially having been or items that had belonged to her found in the storage closet G22.
In G22, yes.
Okay.
Now, authorities were able to determine that this sock and glove both tested positive for Annie's DNA and Raymond Clark's DNA. They even found additional evidence and I'm not sure how they missed it the first time because they looked through trash receptacles, they visited the disposal sites, but now at this point in time, they discover a laundry bag that had somehow been overlooked, and they find a pair of sweatpants that have dried blood and semen. The dried blood was confirmed to have belonged to Annie Lay.
Was any of the DNA left Raymond Clark's blood?
No.
No blood.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Not from the records not from what I've read, not from what I've seen. Most of the DNA they find that is his is semen.
So Raymond Clark gains access to Annie Lay's research lab, goes in, attacks her, or
yes,
ends up strangling her, and then there's an evacuation ordered. So he, in his panic, knows that somebody's probably going to come check all of the rooms to make sure that they're cleared, and puts her body in a laundry hamper and relocates her to G22, the storage room, during the evacuation.
Yes, I think so.
And then comes back, takes the laundry hamper to the bathroom where he hides her body in the wall. So I assume that he leaves semen on the sweatpants prior to the evacuation occurring?
I think so. So what I did, these were notes that I captured, but I didn't put into the final edit, which is that on Annie's last day alive, we know that Raymond made lots of movements from G13, Annie's lab, to G22, right down the hall.
Probably where he got the laundry hamper from.
So I know somewhere it's mentioned that your theory is kind of the prevailing theory of what happens, even though it's never totally confirmed by Raymond Clark, which, spoiler alert, he ends up being the actual killer. And it's believed that he harmed and killed Annie Lay in G13, used one of the large tables they had to move resources in the building, and moved her body to G22, the storage closet. Somehow that's when her necklace becomes ripped. A bead is lost. He puts those materials in the ceiling tile, whatever else, and her body stays on that table until he ultimately moves it later, after the fire drill, down to that basement bathroom.
So they don't think that her body was ever in G22?
No, yes, it was.
Oh.
He moved it using one of those big tables from G13 to G22. And in G22...
Just on an open table?
Not just on an open, they have these big tables that have they're very large and multiple layers. And so they think that he put her body somehow in that and covered it and just moved it.
Okay.
And that's how he moved it from one place to the other. And it ended up not being suspicious on camera.
But do they have footage of him moving the table?
I don't know.
Just a precaution in case he was caught on camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of this is more than enough to make a case against Raymond Clark. But that green pen that I mentioned earlier, this kind of green fluorescent pen, as detectives continue to conduct their research and begin to look further into Raymond Clark and his movements that day, they notice that about the time that Annie Lay's body is placed in that basement bathroom, Raymond Clark goes from using exclusively fluorescent green pen to do his physical sign in and outs of rooms to black. Raymond Clark never uses black. He uses the same green pen every day to complete his physical logs of where he's been.
So Raymond lost his pen in his haste to hide the body of the woman he murdered.
Yes.
Got it. What a weird choice. A fluorescent green pen.
It's just begging for attention. It's weird.
How long had he worked there?
I'm not sure. That Amistad building had only existed for 2 years. And so I don't know if he previously worked with the university as an animal care technician.
Right.
What I do know is that he did have this kind of history of aggression and violence that he had kind of hidden from his coworkers, but his past girlfriends had experienced and even filed reports about. And when Raymond Clark was called in for questioning, a physical examination revealed that he had several defensive wounds that were consistent with the kind of scenario that would have occurred with Annie Lay. And they happened to be on his chest and his shoulder. Investigators also theorized that this was something that Raymond Clark had been planning. They believed that he targeted Annie Lay and that the primary motive behind this attack was sexual assault. The viciousness of the attack was this kind of brutal attempt to cover his tracks. Confronted with all of this overwhelming evidence, Clark chose a path that would ultimately rob Annie Lay's family of a full trial, of the open confrontation with the man who stole their loved one's life. In March 2011, Raymond Clark pleaded guilty to murder and attempted sexual assault. A plea deal spared the family additional trauma, but left lingering questions that could have only really been answered through a trial.
I mean, I think that you look for answers for closure, but I don't think that you were ever going to get the answers from him that they would have wanted.
I agree. Well, nothing would have been satisfying.
No.
Nothing would have alleviated the pain or the trauma or the experience.
No, I think if anything, it would have been equally frustrating as him not, just because you don't know what you don't know. And so by him pleading and not going to trial, they're frustrated. But I think had he pled not guilty and they had gone to trial, the answers that they were seeking would not have been revealed.
Yeah, I agree. Raymond Clark is now serving out what will likely ultimately be a life sentence. The exact amount of time, I'm not sure, but the way it's conveyed is that it should last throughout his entire lifetime. While Raymond Clark has the ability to continue to live his life, although imprisoned, Annie Lay won't get to know that. She won't get the experience of getting to live out the rest of her life. Jonathan will not have ever had the experience of being married to his love. And Annie will never have had the chance to do more good work with her research. In the wake of Annie's murder, the Annie Lay and Jung Lee Scholarship Fund shines as a defiant beacon of light amidst the tragedy. The fund carries Annie's legacy, supporting underrepresented students pursuing careers in biomedical sciences. Each dedicated student who receives the scholarship stands as a testament to the enduring power of Annie's spirit and the unwavering belief that knowledge and progress remain unstoppable, even in the face of violence. According to the Yale Daily News, as a result of Annie Lay's death, there have been changes implemented at the Amistad building. Security protocols have been heightened, and there has been a renewed sense of vigilance permeating the halls where Annie once walked.
Just in that building?
That's kind of the direct quote from the Yale Daily News.
This seems like such a random occurrence that seems, it almost seems useless.
Too little, too late.
Well, not too little, too late. I don't know that there was anything that you were going to do to be able to prevent this guy from having this moment. I mean, unless there was an actual record of his violent behavior in past relationships, and even at that, would that have prevented him from being hired here? That is where the safety and security should be heightened, is in the hiring process. Mm-hmm. Even if it is a low-level position, I think even if he wasn't an animal caretaker at this research lab at Yale, wherever he was, this was likely to happen. I've got a theory on a psychological profile that if it is believed that this was motivated by sexual assault, And he's got a history of violent behavior in intimate partner relationships. I imagine that he uses violence during sexual encounters with his partners to achieve sexual gratification. And at some point, that stops being gratifying because the behavior escalates. And so it gives the hallmarks of somebody's first offense in what would have likely become serialized behavior.
Right.
But he was doing this in order to reach a sexual gratification that he was no longer able to obtain in his relationships with a partner who he maybe was more aggressive or violent with during moments of, I don't even want to call it intimacy, but I think that that's probably how he was treating the situation.
What he understood as intimacy.
I don't even want to give him that much credit. So I think that this was going to happen wherever he was, because he was always going to get to this point where what he was getting at home was not enough. Right. I don't think there was anything that could have been done to prevent this from happening. So it just seems like an exercise in futility to now we take more safety precautions and this place is really locked up like Fort Knox. It was already.
Right.
This was somebody who came there and was supposed to be there every day and had access to places that he was supposed to have access to every day. This was not preventable because you can't predict behavior.
I mean, I suppose you can to an extent, but I think you're right. I think that when you say that the only thing that could have hopefully stopped Raymond Clark would have been to have a firm grasp and understanding of his history, especially of this intimate partner violence. And I don't think that was available.
But I don't think that you take intimate partner violence and you translate that into the workplace. It really sounds like it wasn't intimate partner violence as much as it was probably intimate partner terrorism, where he was the one being violent, not a mutual.
Right. There's a few things I want to clarify. So Annie Lay was a doctoral student in pharmacology at Yale University of Medicine, and her research focused on how to improve blood vessel growth in damaged tissues. That was her focus. The applications of the treatments that she was working on were for diseases like diabetes and heart disease. And while her research was still ongoing at the time of her death, she had co-authored different publications, different articles, and the one I made reference to was published in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, and it explored and highlighted the role of fatty acids in regulating an enzyme that was believed to improve cellular metabolism, especially as its application would work towards metabolic diseases like diabetes. Lastly, just to provide 100% clarification, Annie Lay's fiance, Jonathan Widawsky, was a graduate student in applied physics and mathematics at Columbia University, which is what I shared, but I didn't say applied physics. I said physics and mathematics. The vast majority of the information for today's case came from Forensic Files 2, episode The Green Pin, from HLN. And then the New York Times body of missing Yale student is found in Wall, the New Haven Register, Oxygen, their episode of A Wedding and a Murder, Yale Alumni Magazine, The Death of Annie Lay, and Yale Daily News. Yale responds to Lay Krauthamer murders.
It sounds like Annie Lay would have, had she been given the opportunity, would have probably gone on to do a lot of good in research and in helping treat or even cure metabolic diseases. Mm-hmm. So it's a really tragic loss.
Yeah. The work she was doing was so very important, and she was making headway in helping restore tissue. At
24.
Right.
Can you imagine if she had been given the opportunity to live a full life?
Yeah.
Such a loss.
A terrible loss. But it truly does make me happy to know that the Annie Lay Scholarship does exist at Yale University, and that it serves students very similar to her so that they have the opportunity to do the same.
Yeah, and it helps create part of her legacy. Okay, a complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, please subscribe and drop us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening.
Recommend us to a friend, and make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Like us on Facebook at Until the End of Crime and join our discussion group.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so send us an email with questions, requests, or episode suggestions.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.